I think for Nixon in China, Pete Sellers rounded everybody up. That's my memory. I don't know. It was a very long time ago. So I had met Peter at Purchase at the PepsiCo Festival, and he was doing his operas, and we met. He saw my work. I saw his. His first proposal was that we collaborate on something big. Pajama Game is what he proposed, which we haven't done. It's not a bad idea. But not long after that, he approached me with the idea of choreographing the version of the Red Detachment of Women for Nixon in China, and I did. So the music was basically pretty much done, and of course, the way John works in a MIDI recording, synthesized, and so I worked from that. In the second opera, The Death of Klinghoffer, that I worked on with John and with Peter, the choruses were specifically intended by Alice Goodman, the librettist, to be choreographed by me. And John wrote these big choruses that are interspersed throughout the piece. They're on a very grand and very wonderful sort of chorale scale. And I agreed to choreograph these pieces knowing that the set was very complicated and, to me, dangerous. And I said that my company would perform in this piece, but they would never go up on the set. They would only be on the floor. And I also said to Peter Sellers, when we were talking about rehearsing this, we did this in Brussels, I said, well, I'll do this, but I don't want there to be any guns and any wheelchairs. And when I showed up on the first day of rehearsal, there was a table loaded with guns and like 5 or 6 wheelchairs. I said, well, I'm not so sure about that. So John, I believe, agreed with me, and we ended up with some shrouded guns, 1 wheelchair. The dancers were only on the floor. The music was written for these choruses that were explicitly to be danced by my company. The music was very dense and thrilling, and some of it quite complicated and very fast. And the dancers learn music very, very rapidly, and so it's in a certain way they know the music, they know it rhythmically, usually sooner and better than the musicians do. So that can be frustrating to other musicians. But the music was written specifically to be danced by my specific company, and that's what made it work out very well. Peter Sellers, in directing this work and many others, uses a form of gestural communication that he calls the Peter Sellers School of Dance. And very often people mistake my work for his when we work together, which is fine because we mean it to be a whole. So Peter and I respond to John's music, I think, in a similar way. The way that it is rhythmically expressive, and the way that he sets text to music, and the way that the orchestra is pretty much always churning, away underneath whatever's happening dramatically and vocally. There's a huge excitement that happens even in the slowest, stillest parts of John's operas. The last piece I did to music of John's was his Son of Chamber Symphony that I choreographed as a dance for San Francisco Ballet called Joyride. And he was sending me the music, again on a MIDI recording, which is both edifying and frustrating because it doesn't sound like the instruments, and it also is exactly how it's written, and no one will ever play it that perfectly. So I was getting the music in installments from John. I would get a MIDI recording, a tape, then I would get manuscript, and then I would get sort of the true copy having been notated cleanly. And so I was working on the piece with the dancers in the studio who are counting like crazy. There's always, it's always really tricky. John emailed me asking if the music was undanceable, and I responded, of course it's undanceable, and that's why it's interesting to work on. Most music that's written for dancing specifically is incredibly predictable and dull. So in my whole life, and my career as a choreographer and as a dancer, I avoid dance music because there's no surprise to any of it. So in fact, occasionally John will throw in a bar of 1/8 or something. I said, can't that just be a comma or something, but it's the way he thinks, and it's the way why the music turns out the way it does, with all of what sounds like it's going along fine, and then you find yourself a little bit caught somehow, the extra step at the bottom of the flight of stairs that you're not predicting. That's one tiny facet of his music that makes it stimulating and interesting and exciting to make up dances to and to dance to. My working relationship with John usually goes something like, I haven't seen him for years, and I meet him backstage someplace, and he says, how come you never choreograph any of my music? And then I say, I've choreographed these things, and I'm working on this right now. So I love his music to listen to. I love the orchestral writing. I'm thrilled and puzzled sometimes by the vocal writing, and it's full of an incredible sort of surge, a sort of, well, here's the word, it's actually swing. So, and of course, no music works unless it swings, and John's music has still within it the skeleton of big band music, as well as the Bach cantatas, as well as all of modern music and world music, as it's called, and history, and it's alive. And now, when someone asked me when I was choreographing Joyride to the Son of Chamber Symphony, why I was just doing this piece now, the answer was, he hasn't even finished it yet. So, the wonderful thing is it's exactly now, and he's alive and writing wonderful music, and one can't resist it. Well, in the first days of Nixon in China, which we worked on in Houston, Texas, we were all, of course, younger than we are now. John is super old, and I'm kind of old, and the dancers who were in it are now old. Everybody's older now. Everybody who wrote about it, who reviewed it, who performed it, who designed it, the incredible set designs by Adrian Lobel, the incredible lighting by James F. Ingalls, the incredible singers, all of them, and Peter, John, and I, and Alice Goodman working together for the first time given the opportunity to do a big and important opera about a recent event was a miracle. It was an amazing experience. We were all making it up as we went along, and we were smart and courageous, and I think we still are. Another thing about John that pleases me so much is that he became very devoted to the music of Lou Harrison, who was a very good friend of mine and whose music I've choreographed many, many times over the years. And one time when John was asking me why I choreographed so much of Lou Harrison's music, I said that partly because when I was working, I commissioned a piece from Lou, and when he wrote it, I thought something was a little bit weird with it, and I sent some of it back and asked him to reapproach it. And the miracle is he then did. So, that was a kind of a collaborative, I don't know, not a lesson, but a tip, that it takes a whole bunch of people to make something like this happen, and everyone's an expert, and we're meant to be.